The morning mist clung to the dense Afghan forest like a gray blanket as Navy SEAL Team Bravo moved through the undergrowth in single-file formation. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison led the 8-man team, his M4 carbine held at the ready as they navigated the treacherous mountain terrain. The intel had been clear. A high-value target was operating from a compound 3 clicks northeast of their current position. Behind Morrison, Petty Officer Marcus Chen checked his GPS coordinates for the 4th time in 10 minutes. The forest was thicker than their satellite imagery had indicated, and the canopy above blocked most of the morning sun, creating an eerie twilight atmosphere even though it was barely past dawn. The team had been moving for 2 hours since their helicopter insertion, and every man felt the weight of their mission pressing down on them. Corpsman Danny Rodriguez adjusted his medical pack as he stepped over a fallen log, his eyes constantly scanning the shadows between the trees. Something felt wrong about this operation from the moment they had received their briefing 12 hours earlier. The intelligence was too clean, too perfect. In his 6 years of special operations, Rodriguez had learned to trust his instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming danger. The point man, Petty Officer First Class Tony Valdez, suddenly raised his closed fist, the universal signal for the team to halt immediately. Every member of the team froze in place, their weapons ready as they listened to the forest around them. Birds called from the treetops above, and somewhere in the distance, water trickled over rocks. But there was something else, something that made the hair on the back of Valdez's neck stand up. Morrison crept forward to join his point man, communicating through hand signals. Valdez pointed ahead to where the forest opened into a small clearing about 50 meters away. Through his binoculars, Morrison could see disturbed earth and what looked like fresh footprints in the mud. The signs were subtle, but to trained eyes, they told a story of recent enemy movement. Communications specialist Ryan Walsh keyed his radio to check in with their command post, but received only static in response. The mountains and thick forest were notorious for blocking radio transmissions, but the timing felt suspicious. He tried different frequencies and channels, but the result was the same: complete radio silence with the outside world. Demolitions expert Mike Torres noticed something that made his blood run cold. Thin wires, barely visible, stretched between several trees at ankle height. They were positioned exactly where a patrol would naturally walk if they continued on their current path. His trained eye immediately recognized the setup. This was a classic kill zone, and they were walking straight into it. Morrison received Torres's silent warning and immediately understood the gravity of their situation. They were not the hunters anymore. They had become the hunted. The mission intel had been compromised, and enemy forces were waiting for them. But backing out now would mean abandoning their mission and potentially walking into another ambush along their extraction route. The team leader made a tactical decision that would prove both wise and dangerous. Instead of retreating or advancing into the obvious trap, he signaled for the team to spread out and take defensive positions. If they were going to fight, they would do it on their own terms, not the enemy's. Sniper Brian Kelly found a position behind a large boulder that offered both cover and a clear field of fire across the suspected kill zone. His Barrett M82 rifle was perfectly suited for long-range engagement, and from his position, he could provide overwatch for his teammates. But as he settled into his shooting position, Kelly noticed movement in the trees beyond the clearing that made him question everything they thought they knew about this mission. The movement was too organized, too professional for typical insurgent forces. Through his scope, Kelly caught glimpses of military-grade equipment and coordinated positioning that suggested they were facing a well-trained enemy unit. This was not the ragtag group of fighters their intelligence had described, but rather a sophisticated military force that had been expecting them. Explosions suddenly erupted around the SEAL team's position as mortars began falling from the sky like deadly rain. The enemy had been watching them, waiting for the perfect moment to spring their trap. The forest floor shook with each impact, sending dirt and debris flying through the air as the SEALs scrambled for better cover. Machine gun fire opened up from multiple positions, creating a crossfire that pinned the team down behind whatever cover they could find. Bullets whined overhead and slammed into trees with wet thuds, sending bark and splinters flying. Morrison realized they were facing at least a full squad of enemy fighters, possibly more, and they had the advantage of prepared positions and superior numbers. Rodriguez felt a sharp pain in his shoulder as a bullet grazed him, tearing through his uniform and drawing blood. He pressed himself against the trunk of a massive pine tree, his medical training automatically assessing the wound as minor but painful. Around him, his teammates were returning fire, but they were clearly outgunned and surrounded. The situation was deteriorating rapidly when Torres spotted something that gave him hope. A muzzle flash from high in the trees, but it was not aimed at the SEAL team. Instead, one of the enemy machine gunners suddenly slumped forward, his weapon falling silent. Someone else was in this fight, and they were targeting the enemy forces. Walsh managed to establish brief radio contact with their command post, shouting over the sound of gunfire that they were under heavy attack and needed immediate air support. But even as he spoke, he knew that help was at least 30 minutes away, and they might not survive the next 5 minutes without some kind of miracle. Kelly adjusted his scope and searched for targets, but the enemy positions were well concealed and protected. Every time he acquired a target, return fire forced him to duck back behind cover. The enemy knew exactly where the SEAL team was positioned, but the Americans were fighting blind against an unseen adversary. Another enemy fighter fell, this time the mortar man who had been raining death down on their position. The shot came from a completely different direction than the first, suggesting their unknown ally was mobile and highly skilled. Morrison began to hope that they might have stumbled into a friendly force operation, but something about the precision of the shots suggested otherwise. The forest battle raged for what felt like hours, but was actually only 20 minutes. The SEAL team was holding their own, but ammunition was running low, and they had taken casualties. Rodriguez was treating a serious leg wound on one of his teammates when another perfectly placed shot eliminated the enemy squad leader, causing visible confusion among the remaining fighters. As suddenly as it had started, the enemy fire began to slacken. The remaining fighters seemed to be pulling back, but Morrison knew this could be a tactical retreat designed to lure them into another trap. He maintained his defensive position and waited, listening to the sounds of the forest returning to normal as the gunfire faded away. In the growing silence, the SEAL team realized they had survived their first contact with what appeared to be a sophisticated enemy force. But they also knew that somewhere in these same woods was a sniper of extraordinary skill who had probably saved their lives. The question now was whether this mysterious marksman was friend or foe, and what would happen when they inevitably crossed paths. The silence that followed the gunfight was almost more unnerving than the battle itself. Morrison signaled his team to maintain their positions while he tried to assess their tactical situation. 3 of his men were wounded, though none critically, and they had expended nearly half their ammunition in the firefight. The enemy had withdrawn, but he knew they were still out there, watching and waiting. Communications specialist Walsh finally managed to establish solid radio contact with their forward operating base. The news was not encouraging. Air support was delayed due to weather conditions at the airfield, and the nearest quick reaction force was engaged in another operation 40 kilometers away. For the next few hours, Team Bravo was completely on their own in hostile territory. Corpsman Rodriguez finished treating the leg wound on Petty Officer Davis, using his limited medical supplies to stop the bleeding and stabilize the injury. Davis could still walk, but his mobility was significantly reduced, which would complicate any movement through the difficult forest terrain. Rodriguez reported to Morrison that all 3 wounded men could continue the mission, but they would need to move more slowly and carefully. From his sniper position, Kelly continued to scan the forest through his scope, searching for any sign of the mysterious marksman who had intervened during the ambush. He had counted at least 4 confirmed enemy kills from the unknown shooter, each one a perfect headshot that demonstrated exceptional skill and professional training. This was not the work of a local fighter or insurgent, but rather someone with military sniper training. The sound of a breaking twig somewhere to their north made every member of the team tense up and aim their weapons in that direction. Morrison used hand signals to coordinate their response, spreading his men out to create interlocking fields of fire while maintaining cover behind the large trees and boulders scattered throughout the forest. A figure emerged from the shadows between the trees, moving with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in this environment. At first, the SEALs assumed it was another enemy fighter, but something about the movement pattern seemed different. The figure was not trying to remain hidden, but was deliberately making noise to announce their presence. When the person stepped into a patch of filtered sunlight, Morrison felt his breath catch in his throat. It was a woman, probably in her early 30s, wearing woodland camouflage fatigues and carrying a precision rifle that he immediately recognized as a Russian-made Dragunov sniper system. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her face bore the calm, focused expression of a professional soldier. She raised one hand in a peaceful gesture while keeping her rifle pointed safely toward the ground. In accented but clear English, she called out to the hidden SEAL team. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to command situations, and there was no fear or hesitation in her tone, despite facing 8 heavily armed American Special Forces operators. Morrison made the decision to respond, stepping partially out of cover while keeping his weapon ready. The woman introduced herself as Captain Elena Volkov of the Russian Spetsnaz, explaining that she had been conducting a solo reconnaissance mission in the area when she stumbled upon the ambush. She claimed to have intervened because the enemy force had also been targeting Russian interests in the region. The revelation that they were dealing with a Russian Special Forces operator created a complex diplomatic and tactical situation for Morrison. Officially, Russian and American forces were not supposed to be operating in this area, and any contact between them could create an international incident. But practically, this woman had probably saved the lives of his entire team. Volkov explained that the enemy force they had encountered was not the typical insurgent group their intelligence had suggested, but rather a well-equipped and trained mercenary unit working for a local warlord who had been attacking both Russian and American interests. She had been tracking this group for 3 days, gathering intelligence on their capabilities and positions. Kelly, still maintaining overwatch from his sniper position, studied the Russian operative through his scope. Her equipment was professional grade, and her movement and positioning demonstrated the kind of training that only came from elite military units. More importantly, her shots during the ambush had been precise and well-timed, suggesting she had been watching the situation develop and had chosen to help rather than simply eliminate all combatants. Torres was skeptical of the Russians' explanation, pointing out through hand signals to Morrison that this could be an elaborate trap designed to capture American Special Forces personnel. The timing was too convenient, and the presence of a lone Russian operator in this specific area at this exact time stretched the bounds of coincidence. Rodriguez, however, was more pragmatic about their situation. 3 of his teammates were wounded, they were low on ammunition, and they still had enemy forces in the area. If this Russian operative was willing to help them complete their mission and extract safely, he was inclined to accept the assistance, regardless of the political implications. Walsh managed to intercept some enemy radio communications, confirming that at least 2 more insurgent groups were moving toward their position. The mercenary unit they had fought earlier was regrouping and calling for reinforcements, which meant the SEAL team would soon be facing overwhelming numbers if they remained in their current location. Volkov seemed to read the tactical situation with the same clarity as the American operators. She proposed a temporary alliance to eliminate the remaining enemy forces and complete both of their missions in the area. Her intelligence indicated that the mercenary groups were operating from a central command post, located in a cave complex about 2 kilometers from their current position. The Russian captain's proposal made tactical sense, but Morrison knew he was making a decision that could have far-reaching consequences beyond their immediate mission. Working with foreign military personnel, especially Russians, required authorization from much higher up the command chain than a staff sergeant could provide. But as mortar rounds began falling around their position again, indicating that the enemy had found their location and was preparing for another assault, Morrison realized that survival took precedence over diplomatic protocols. He made the decision to accept Volkov's assistance, at least until they could extract from the immediate danger zone. Volkov proved her worth immediately by providing detailed intelligence about enemy positions and movement patterns that she had observed during her 3 days of surveillance. Her information allowed the SEAL team to plan a tactical withdrawal that would avoid the prepared ambush sites while moving toward a more defensible position. The combined American-Russian force began moving through the forest with Volkov taking point, using her intimate knowledge of the terrain to guide them along routes that provided maximum concealment. Her expertise with the local geography was evident as she led them around obstacles and danger areas that would have significantly slowed their progress. As they moved, Kelly found himself impressed with the Russian sniper's fieldcraft and tactical awareness. She moved through the forest like a ghost, leaving virtually no trace of their passage while maintaining constant vigilance for threats. Her professional competence was undeniable, regardless of the political complexities of their situation. The sound of helicopters in the distance raised hopes that American air support was finally arriving, but Volkov quickly identified the aircraft as enemy transport helicopters, bringing additional mercenary forces to the area. The situation was escalating beyond what either the SEAL team or the lone Russian operative could handle alone. Morrison made another crucial decision as enemy forces began to converge on their position from multiple directions. They would have to fight their way out of the forest, and their best chance for survival was to work together as a combined team rather than as separate American and Russian units operating with conflicting objectives. The enemy helicopters circled overhead like mechanical vultures as Morrison and Volkov quickly developed a plan to break through the encirclement that was forming around their position. The Russian captain had identified a weakness in the enemy formation, where a steep ravine created a natural gap in their coverage, but reaching it would require crossing 200 meters of partially open ground. Kelly and Volkov worked together to establish a sniper team that could provide covering fire for the rest of the group. Despite the language and cultural barriers, the two professional marksmen quickly developed an effective communication system based on hand signals and tactical experience. Their combined firepower would be crucial for suppressing enemy positions during the dangerous crossing. Torres rigged improvised explosive devices using his remaining demolition supplies and some equipment that Volkov had been carrying. The Russian operative proved to be well-versed in explosive tactics, and together they created a series of distractions that would help mask the team's movement toward their escape route through the forest. Rodriguez redistributed medical supplies among the team members, knowing that the upcoming fight would likely result in additional casualties. The 3 wounded SEALs were given stimulant injections to help them maintain combat effectiveness, though Rodriguez warned Morrison that the effects would be temporary and that all 3 men would need proper medical attention soon. The first explosion echoed through the forest as Torres's diversionary charges began detonating in sequence, drawing enemy attention away from the team's actual position. Immediately, Volkov and Kelly began engaging targets of opportunity, their precise shots eliminating enemy spotters and communications personnel who were trying to coordinate the search efforts. Walsh maintained constant communication with their command post, providing real-time updates on their tactical situation while requesting immediate extraction support. The news remained discouraging. Weather conditions at the nearest airbase continued to prevent helicopter operations, and ground-based quick reaction forces were still hours away from their location. Morrison led the movement across the dangerous open ground, using smoke grenades and covering fire to mask their advance toward the ravine. The wounded members of his team moved with determination despite their injuries, understanding that failure to reach the safety of the ravine would likely result in capture or death for the entire group. Enemy forces responded quickly to the diversion, but their reaction was exactly what Volkov had predicted based on her days of observation. The mercenary units moved in predictable patterns, allowing the sniper team to anticipate their positions and eliminate key personnel before they could establish effective firing positions against the escaping Americans and Russians. The ravine provided temporary safety, but Morrison knew they needed to keep moving to maintain their advantage. Volkov suggested following the natural waterway that ran through the bottom of the ravine, as it would lead them toward a series of caves where they could establish a defensive position while waiting for extraction or reinforcements. As the combined team moved through the rocky ravine, Chen noticed that their GPS equipment was being jammed by sophisticated electronic warfare systems. The enemy force was more technologically advanced than any insurgent group they had previously encountered, confirming Volkov's assessment that they were dealing with professional mercenaries rather than local fighters. The sound of pursuit echoed from behind them as enemy forces discovered their escape route and began following through the ravine. Morrison realized they would need to establish a defensive position soon, as the wounded members of his team were beginning to slow down despite the stimulant injections Rodriguez had administered. Volkov identified a defensible position where the ravine narrowed into a bottleneck that would force attacking forces to advance through a natural kill zone. The position offered multiple escape routes while providing excellent fields of fire, making it an ideal location for a small unit to hold off a much larger force. Kelly and Volkov established interlocking sniper positions that covered all approaches to their defensive position. Their combined expertise created a deadly crossfire that would make any direct assault extremely costly for the attacking forces, buying time for American air support to arrive or for the team to plan another escape route. Torres set up his remaining explosive devices as booby traps along the most likely approach routes, creating additional obstacles for any enemy forces attempting to assault their position. Working with Volkov's knowledge of enemy tactics, they created a defensive network that maximized their limited resources and manpower. The first probing attacks came within an hour, with small groups of enemy fighters attempting to test the defensive perimeter. Each probe was met with precise sniper fire that eliminated the attackers before they could gather intelligence about the defensive positions or capabilities of the combined American-Russian force. Rodriguez treated the wounded team members again, using the temporary lull in combat to provide more thorough medical attention. The leg wound on Petty Officer Davis was showing signs of infection, and Rodriguez knew that without proper medical facilities, all 3 wounded men would be in serious danger within the next few hours. Walsh finally received encouraging news from their command post. Weather conditions were improving at the airbase, and a medical evacuation helicopter was being prepared for immediate launch once the cloud ceiling lifted sufficiently for safe flight operations in the mountainous terrain. Volkov shared intelligence about enemy reinforcements that were moving toward their position, including the information that the mercenary unit had access to heavy weapons and armored vehicles that would make their current defensive position untenable within a few hours. The situation was rapidly approaching a critical decision point. Morrison faced a difficult choice between attempting to hold their current position until air support arrived or trying to move his wounded team members through hostile territory toward an alternative extraction site. Either option carried significant risks, but remaining stationary would eventually result in being overwhelmed by superior enemy numbers and firepower. The Russian captain proposed a bold plan that would use her knowledge of the local cave systems to move the team through underground passages that would bring them out several kilometers away from their current position. The route would be difficult and dangerous, especially for wounded personnel, but it offered the best chance for avoiding the enemy forces that were converging on the ravine. Kelly confirmed through his scope that enemy heavy weapons teams were setting up positions that would soon be able to target their defensive location with mortars and rocket-propelled grenades. The window of opportunity for attempting Volkov's escape plan was rapidly closing, and any delay would make movement impossible. As enemy mortars began ranging on their position, Morrison made the decision to trust the Russian operative and attempt the underground escape route. The alternative was certain death or capture for his entire team, and despite the diplomatic complications, Volkov had proven herself to be a reliable ally in combat. The combined team began moving into the cave system just as the first accurate mortar rounds began impacting their former defensive positions. Torres triggered his remaining explosive devices as they retreated, collapsing part of the ravine entrance and buying precious time before the enemy could discover their escape route. The underground journey was harrowing, with wounded team members struggling through narrow passages and over treacherous rocky terrain in complete darkness, except for their tactical lights. Volkov's knowledge of the cave system proved invaluable as she guided them through a maze of tunnels that would have been impossible to navigate without prior experience. After 3 hours of underground movement, the team emerged from the cave system at a location where Walsh was able to establish clear radio communication with their command post. The news was encouraging, air support was finally available, and a medical evacuation helicopter was en route to their new position. As American helicopters approached the extraction site, Morrison faced the complex situation of what to do about Captain Volkov. Officially, her presence created diplomatic complications that could have serious consequences, but personally, he knew that she had saved the lives of his entire team through her skill and courage. Volkov solved the dilemma by disappearing back into the forest before the helicopters arrived, leaving behind only a brief note thanking the American team for their professionalism and expressing hope that they would recover quickly from their wounds. By the time Morrison could have pursued her, she had vanished completely into the wilderness where she obviously felt completely at home. The medical evacuation proceeded smoothly, with all 3 wounded SEALs receiving immediate treatment during the flight back to their forward operating base. Rodriguez's quick medical attention in the field had prevented any life-threatening complications, though full recovery would take several weeks of proper medical care and rehabilitation. In his after-action report, Morrison faced the difficult task of explaining the encounter with the Russian operative without creating an international incident. He chose to focus on the tactical aspects of the mission while downplaying the extent of cooperation with foreign military personnel, understanding that the truth might never be fully reported through official channels. The mission that had started as a routine special operations assignment had become a complex international encounter that highlighted both the dangers and opportunities of modern asymmetric warfare. Morrison knew that somewhere in those same mountains, Captain Elena Volkov was continuing her own mission, and he hoped that if their paths crossed again, it would be under equally cooperative circumstances.